Hello, and welcome to Animation in the Industry. I'm your host, Isaiah Vargas, and on today's show, we'll be discussing the animation medium, the process of animation creation, and the seeming lack of respect for this important art form. Joining me today in this discussion, an animation instructor at MATC in Milwaukee who has done work for The Simpsons and Disney, among others, Mr. Timothy Decker. Thank you for joining us today, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Isaiah.
Alrighty, so I think the best place to start off with our discussion today, because animation is such a lucrative medium and there's so many people that work in it, just to talk about the basic process of animation and what it all entails. So if you could just, how does it work?
It is a lot of work. I mean, you have to get solid writing first. The writers are key. The story is key. And then you have to have a talented crew that can design the characters and the backgrounds to match the characters and put them in their world. And I think, you know, that takes time in itself. But then when you start in on a 26-minute episode, you have to get the dialogue to everybody, get the storyboards done, and then time the storyboards out to the dialogue, which is called an animatic, just to make sure it's going to smooth, your cuts are right, you can check your boards against the against the dialogue, and then you go into production and into layout. So then once the background guys are doing the backgrounds, the character layout guys are laying out the characters, where they're going to be in the scenes, and then it gets to the animator, where the animator will do the animation for the scenes per character. And that whole process is done here, and then they send it overseas to be the in-betweens between your key poses, and then the cleanup and color, and final timing to the dialogue. And that comes back, and it's all digital now, so it's all over the internet coming back and forth.
And animation certainly used to have a lot more work into it because, like you said, now it's digital, so everything can kind of be done on a computer. But of course, back then, about 40, 50 years ago, we didn't have computers like that. So
30 years ago, 20 years ago.
There certainly was a lot of hard work put into animation, especially back then when digital wasn't a thing.
Yeah. When I was on Simpsons and on Ninja Turtles and that, we were drawing on paper, and you're drawing and flipping your art, flipping your drawings to make sure they move right. And you did your scenes and you handed them off, and then they went to camera. And you weren't sure if, in your own heart you thought, wow, I timed it out right. I think I did the animation exactly how they wanted it. I hope I did. But, push comes to shove, when it came back after being shot, you were either right on or you were way off, and they're going to talk to you about it. What were you thinking? We just wasted 2 days of production shooting your scene. By the time you got done drawing it, by the time you got to the camera, and by the time we got it back, and this is what we have, we got to redo your scene.
Yeah. So it's certainly, it takes a lot of people to work in animation. You're essentially, unlike something like a live-action movie, there's a lot of people who are working to create the visuals. And of course, there's a lot of things. There's an animatic, there's a storyboard, there's coloring, you have to send it overseas. So there's a lot of different steps to it. And it's not only just that, too. There are certainly a lot of other animation forms.
Well, in comparison, there's a lot of hangers-on, if you will, in live action. Like I've been on Beverly Hills 90210 and that, and you realize that, you have the cameraman, you have the grips, you have the assistants to the actors, you have the assistants to the directors, you have the assistant producer, you have the lighting people, you have the camera people. You have a boatload of people doing this. Now, in animation, you have the animator, you have the director, the assistant director, the layout people, and the animators. And, and we control the lighting, we control everything. And most of the time, our characters don't get the flu. They don't get moody, and our actors are the animators bringing those characters to life. And it's a lot more streamlined than live action.
Absolutely. And as I said before, the animation has a lot of different art forms. There's not just 2D. Nowadays, you have so many different types of
yes.
animation.
Oh, God.
You have CG animation, you have stop motion animation, you have animation that can be made from anything. You can have animation made from like, I'm trying to think from like.
Well, you can have 2D and 3D, you can have 2.5D, you can have all completely 3D, or you can have animation and live action. I mean, you can combine everything, and animation is used in all kinds of things, not just film. You know, medical, technology. We're out there and everything. And now is the golden time, another golden time. Let's say it's another golden time. Because you have Netflix, you have Amazon, you have all these internet places that want to create animation. Which puts us in a perfect place at MATC and Milwaukee Public Television.
Absolutely.
We can really make something happen here.
Absolutely, and animation can come from anywhere, and that kind of leads me into our next topic of discussion. Kind of going off of all that, animation is a lucrative medium, and a lot of people have worked in it past, present, and will continue to work in it in the future, and every animated project has a boatload of people working on it. And it comes down to every single minute detail.
Oh, yeah.
And whether it's a show or a movie or a short.
Oh, it all begins with the characters. And if the characters are good and things are moving along, you get the show, then you get to consumer products. Then you get, you know, in consumer products, you get the figurines, the tablecloths, the shirts, everything. It drives it. And you make, there is a lot of money to be made in animation. And I don't, you know, and people say, oh yeah, but you can't do it. It's hard to get in. Sure, it's hard to get in, but once you cash in, you're going to be there, and your studio is going to be fine.
Well, and certainly with the age of the internet, animation has become a lot more, I wouldn't say it's become a lot more accessible, but it's become a lot more easier to find independent animators. With the internet and YouTubers, you find all these people who either by themselves or in a small group still manage to make something that's so artistically beautiful or insane.
That's one of the positives of COVID. It made people realize that they can work from home. It made producers in Hollywood and everybody realize that, hey, these artists can work from their own studio and they can do just as much or more, because they have the freedom of waking up in their pajamas and getting to work, have a cup of coffee and go to work. And instead of having to get in their car, drive an hour and a half in traffic, which was my case, you know, and I only live 15 miles, took me an hour and a half to get into Disney from La Crescenta at the height of, you know, morning rush hour and afternoon. But now people can work from home and they can do all kinds of things. And you have all these snippets of people all around the world that work together on a project. You know, I did stuff in Chicago. We were working with animations teams in India, and then we were working with the team in Los Angeles. So, I mean, we had all these artists all over the place and trying to, it's kind of like herding cats, but we still got everything done.
It's such a, again, it's because there's a lot of people who consider animation to kind of be a genre. It's not a genre, it's a medium, because it is a form of art where people take their styles, their ways of seeing it, and they put their own spin on it, and they create their own characters. And as I said before, I mean, it could be either these giant groups of people in these big studios, it could be independent animators, or it can even be like a small ragtag group of people who just make something that can...
Who are compelled to make something imaginative.
Exactly.
And that's, those are, you know, there's all kinds of people that have an idea. There's all kinds of people that have a great film in their head, you know, and then there's, you know, it takes the artist to bring it to life. And I say that always to my students, because you can have a great story, that's great, it gives me visuals, but to sell that story, I have to come up with great characters. I have to have the artist come up with some great things. And then when you're working with big teams, you know, the concept teams are all cranking out all these beautiful drawings, and the characters evolve and become. Like on The Simpsons from Tracy Ullman, we were talking earlier during some of the times we talked before this. Tracy Ullman was the beginning of The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons were very kind of crude there in their appearance. And then it took the likes of other artists like David Silverman, and those guys came in, and David perfected Matt's characters to the point that they are so beautifully drawn, and there's such a simple approach to drawing them, but everybody on the team has to draw exactly alike. And you have a room of 100 artists. We all have to draw perfectly alike.
Exactly. And it comes back to the evolution of the art form. You look at animation from like the very beginning, the 1910s, the 1920s, when film was brand new, and you compare it to like even stuff that came out in the 40s or the 50s, you can say that as it's gone on, people realize, hey, we can really like expand on this. We can bring things that you can never do in real life. Animation brings that to life. That is the avenue for you can make the most incredible things in the world.
We're in charge of our own environments. We can make it rain, we can make it snow.
The makers of...
we can make it all happen. And I want to touch on your point about earlier animations. Animation and cartoon art have been with us since caveman. And the first real animators were the hieroglyphics, the artists that did hieroglyphics. If you ever looked at those, I animated those for a game we made at Knowledge Adventure. We took actual hieroglyphics and just took the poses and just drew them and see how they animated. And they ended up being phenomenally cool.
Wow. That's incredible.
And they were animating on those walls. I mean, so animation, the fascination with movement and art has been there since the beginning of time.
Absolutely. And with all this in mind, it definitely brings to mind that as much as people love animation, and as much as people work in animation, as much as people put their time and some people put their lives into this stuff, there still seems to be a bit of a disrespect for the medium.
Yes.
And it can come from anywhere. It can be intentional or unintentional.
It's just a cartoon. That's the quote. It's just a cartoon. What are you talking about? It's just a cartoon. You're just a cartoonist. You're just an animator. You know what? That Just a Cartoon Lion King is one of the biggest box office hits. That Just a Cartoon Mermaid, one of the biggest box office hits. That Just a Cartoon Roger Rabbit, one of the biggest box office hits.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, and that's my time. That's when I was out in Hollywood. That was out there. Now there's still big hits coming around through animation. Avatar's animation, 3D animation. It's still rocking off the charts. Things are rocking off the charts all the time. And why? Because it's animation.
Yep.
I mean, Pixar can knock it out of the park almost every time.
Exactly. I mean, it's just incredible, like the kind of trendsetters that have come. I mean, you have Snow White, which came out in 1939.
And there was a lot of naysayers there.
Exactly. There was a lot of people who thought that was going to fail.
It's just a cartoon.
And it was the first full-length animated picture. And then you flash forward to the 90s. When Pixar came around with Toy Story, the first CG animated movie ever made, like, it was incredible. Well, and then 2001 when Shrek came out. Shrek, I actually found out recently, the people working on Shrek, it was actually to DreamWorks, that was considered a punishment to send people to work on Shrek because they thought that was going to be a tank.
Yeah.
They wanted to focus more on other films, and yet Shrek is not only one of their... Kids love Shrek.
Yeah.
It is one of their biggest franchises, and he's one of the most well-known, not only characters, but movie franchises in history.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the most popular characters in history are animated. Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, SpongeBob, so many.
I'll put any of them up. The thing that gets me upset, and we were talking about the kind of disconnect of Hollywood and animation, is the Screen Actors Guild. They demand that any studio that does animation has to use SAG actors for voices. Don't you tell us no, you're going to use us. But then when the Animators Union tried to get in under the umbrella of SAG, because SAG represents the Directors Guild, the Producers Guild, the Lighting Guild, the grips, I mean, all this stuff is under SAG.
All aspects of Hollywood.
Except for animation.
That's ridiculous.
And, when I was out there in Hollywood, I went and talked to SAG. I went and talked to the vice president, and he said, it's just a cartoon. You just make cartoons. You guys are like tradesmen. You guys are like, you're on the IBT. You're tradesmen. You're with the plumbers and the electricians. And I was like, really? But you need us for that voice acting. Actors will kill for a chance to be a voice actor. Because they don't have to dress up, they don't have to do anything, they just have to get to the mic and act out.
Yeah, just go into
I'm
a
not saying
voice
they're
booth
not doing anything, it's an art what they do. It's an art in what they do. But the animator that does the acting brings it to life.
Exactly.
And the acting that the animator does is equivalent to or even better than some of the best actors out there.
I agree.
And and it's just mind-blowing because in 1941 was when the animators were striking for royalties and become part of SAG. And they got knocked down because guys crossed the line. Walt kind of bribed some people, I think. I shouldn't say think, I know, but I mean, he kind of
it was definitely
made it a reasonable reason to cross the line.
there was a big upset at the time. A lot of the big studios
but that
were
crushed animators. It's just Walt did a lot of wonderful things for animation, but he also did some really bad things.
And the same thing can be attributed to Warner Brothers. It was just, there was all these amazing people working on those cartoons, and they would maybe get the recognition for their cartoons, but they kind of flew under the radar.
Yeah,
and
they
that
weren't
was
paid very much.
It was terrible.
But
But
it's like Hollywood makes a lot of money on animation, but they don't want to take care of the animators. And one person that did was Jeffrey Katzenberg. I do know that he did take care, and he realizes the value of his animators, and he does take care of them. He pays them well, and he does do a lot for them. It seems like in the times that I was in Hollywood during that time, he was taking care of animators pretty well.
Well, and that definitely leads us into not only the disrespect from Greater Hollywood, but from the Academy. The Motion Picture Academy is another big aspect where animation is sort of a second thought to them.
Because it's better than them.
Exactly. And there's a lot of recently there's been a lot of backlash towards the Academy because,
and rightly so,
they may have a category for Best Animated Feature and Best Animated Short. But that didn't come around until 2001. A lot of great animated films came out before that,
yes.
And they weren't recognized by the Academy.
No.
And now, even now, there's a lot of movies that should be nominated or are nominated but don't win over others. I remember in 2012, the Academy nominated Paranorman, which is an amazing stop-motion animated film by a smaller scale studio, Laika. It was made with love, it was made with care, it had a great message, and it was nominated, but it lost to Brave, Disney Pixar's Brave. And that's not to say that movie is bad.
No.
But there seems to be a disconnect about a movie that deserves an award and one that it's just, it has this studio's name on it, so we got to give it to them. It's like giving an actor an award just because they're this actor. And they could sneeze on film and they'd win an award. But
and there is money behind that too. You have Disney, you have like a Laika was a little guy over here making a rumble, and then Disney is over here going, well, hold on here, we are Disney, we did this.
And it's always a big deal, especially nowadays, when a non-Disney movie or Pixar movie wins an award. When Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse won in 2018, that was a big deal. This year, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. That was a big deal because it was these maybe not smaller scale studios, but it was these studios that normally don't get that recognition, and movies that frankly deserve
and they may
that.
never again
exactly
get that recognition.
It's just incredible that we got so many good movies the last couple years, but it just seems like the Academy doesn't really respect it because it's animation and it's not like a live action film
they don't get it, and they don't I don't think the Academy wants to recognize it too much because then it takes away from the glamour of Hollywood. But, you know, animation people work their hind end off, and they work really hard, and they make just as good of films, and they'll never get the glam slam, if you will, you know, of walking the red carpet and people go, oh my God.
And that goes back to earlier
Look at
about
Shrek in that new dress.
and that goes back to earlier about that goes back to earlier about how many people work in animation, because when it comes to the Academy, you have awards for animated features and maybe a voice actor. But how many awards do you see for animators, for
animation direction,
for artists,
or animation,
for background
lead
designers?
acting,
Usually
any of that
it's
stuff.
directors and voice
And
actors.
the character design is equal to costume design.
Exactly. There's a
And it's
lot of
just like,
things
yeah.
in animation that can be attributed to Hollywood movies. And it just doesn't seem like that because, and I actually remember
And now they say, well, they got the Annie Awards. They got the
exactly.
Annies. It's not,
but the
that's
Annie Awards
nowhere
isn't
near.
enough. The Annie Awards, for as much good as the Annie Awards do, the Oscars is the most well-known and probably the most prestigious
Trophy.
awards ceremony. Exactly.
But, yeah.
And it just seems like there's not a lot of respect from that side.
No.
And not only that, but this leads into our final topic to discuss is that we can talk about Hollywood and the Academy, but there's also a disrespect coming from the general public. And this one is not as intentional,
No.
but I guess the perfect way to start this topic off is I used to know somebody, and I won't disclose who, I used to know somebody who would never watch a 2D animated film because it didn't look realistic to them. It was just a cartoon. And so they would never watch a 2D animated film. They would only watch 3D animated films because it looked more realistic. And that is doing a huge disservice
That's a
to
stereotype
all those
that
people.
goes through a lot, but it's been tackled pretty well over the years. But when I started drawing and working in animation, but you're doing that stuff for kids. It's just for kids. And then no. People are watching The Simpsons on Sunday night. I mean,
Exactly.
it's families watching this. This is a family entertainment. This is a good thing. This and all these other things that came out, Bob's Burgers and Family Guy and Futurama. I mean, those were all driven to everybody, adults
Exactly.
and kids. And some people say, well, I don't want my kids watching that. But, you know, it's out there.
It is out there.
And,
And not only that, but there's also, there's a difference between a kid's movie and a family movie. A kid's movie, there are animated movies that are just for kids. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah, there is. Yes.
But there's also movies that are meant for everyone. Movies like Toy Story and Shrek, kids can watch them, but they have the writing that hooks older
parents.
audiences in.
That's the thing. And, you know, a good film, a good animated film, even if it's made for kids, it's made to engage the parents too, because the parents will start catching some of the jokes that the kids will never even know were there. But you know, you have to engage the family, and a good film does that, engages the whole family to the story. And there's certain things for mom and dad, and there's certain things for the kids, and that's when the film is really super successful, because the parents are like, God, I saw Toy Story and I just loved it. We got to take Grandma. And then Grandma and Grandpa go, oh gosh, we saw that, and it goes right down the pipeline.
And like I said before, many of it's not just movies, it's TV shows. There are people who will sometimes be like, why do you watch stuff like SpongeBob? Why do you still watch SpongeBob when you're 30 years old? It's because there are animations that are made for kids, but they are made for everyone in mind.
And they're
SpongeBob
entertaining.
and Mickey Mouse and Looney Tunes and all those other cartoons are made with everyone in mind, because the people who make these, and again, this brings it all back round circle.
But you're just drawing that, you know. Those are just drawn. Those are cartoons.
But they have a lot of love behind them, and that is the problem today. And I feel that while many people respect animation, there's not enough of it, because it is a medium that has a lot of work put into it, and it deserves all that recognition from everyone.
A lot of people, when they get into production, they say, oh, you know, this is every day at MATC. People come in here and say, oh yeah, we got a great idea for an animation, but we don't want to pay for it. Can we do an animation? And then you say, well, we got to do this, we got to do that. And like I said, the process before, I said, we got to get this done this way. Oh man, we can't get it done in a month?
Yeah.
No, you can't.
It is
Not even if you went overseas, you couldn't get it done in a month.
Exactly. It's not like a live action movie is easier to make because you can just get a camera and an actor. Animation, it's very rare.
Build and make it
It's
happen.
like making a
world.
making a good meal.
You're making a world. You're making a world that people are going to be encapsulated in.
But it's like making a good meal because you are getting all the ingredients you need to make something that is going to look good and just stick with you for as long as you can. And of course, not everything will be like that, but a lot of people put in that effort and it deserves to be recognized.
It's just as good as a live action show.
It's always good. It's an art form,
better.
and
I would
that's
say
why animation deserves the best respect. And unfortunately for today, it looks like that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for Tim for joining us today
thanks for
and
having me, Isaiah.
giving us your expertise and your thoughts
I
on the
appreciate it.
matter.
I'll stand up for the cartoon world.
Absolutely, and we all should. And thank you for watching. Remember that animation, like any other art form, is a medium that has a lot of work put into it and should be remembered for what it can bring to life. I've been your host, Isaiah Vargas, and have a good night.